Hello, everybody. This is Sam Hin with NLCAA. Today, I'm your host, and I will help guide you guys through Section 130.1A through C and F of our wonderful California Title 24 2019 Code. Under the Code Section 130.1, Mandatory Indoor Lighting Controls, there are quite a few other subsections listed, but today we will only cover these four. Notice D for daylighting is not covered in this presentation, and that is because daylighting in itself is quite a complex topic. There's a lot to be explained and talked about, so we left that alone, and daylighting deserves its own presentation. Okay, so Section 130.1A, A for area controls. Each enclosed area must have a manual on and off control or switch. So when you think about manual on and off, all we're talking about is a simple on and off switch. Now, this switch must be accessible to anyone. Anyone who walks into that room or that area where we find this area control, the switch, shall be able to turn lights on and off with this switch. Can't be a switch that requires a key to operate it. Can't be a switch that requires passcode, passkey, punch-in requirements. It's not a switch that is in the form of a remote that sits on somebody's desk. That would not qualify as a switch that is accessible. Third requirement: control must be in the same enclosed area as the lighting it controls. So we're talking about a switch that is located in the same room. We're not talking about a switch that is outside of the room. We're not talking about a switch that is near the area but not within the area, because the previous 2016 code kind of left it open-ended. But 2019, it was reworded where the term must be in the same enclosed area is actually in the actual code. So very important. Switch must be in the same enclosed area. So far, we're talking about manual on and off. We're not talking about dimming yet. So, let's just focus on making sure we have a switch that has this functionality. This last point provides separate control for all types of lighting. So in every single space, you're going to have general lighting. Everybody starts with general lighting. Now, let's say we're doing an office. If your room, has general lighting, which should, but you also have maybe some accent lighting. Maybe you have some wall wash lighting. Maybe you have a couple of downlights that act as accent. To us, that is two separate controls that must be provided for those two types of lights. So you're going to either have two on and off switch on the wall, or maybe it's a single gang switch that has on and off for the first type of light, and you'll have another on and off for the second type of light. The important thing is making sure we have the ability to control those manually, separately. All right, so let's talk about the exceptions when it comes to the on and off switching requirements. So the exceptions I'm going to talk about here doesn't say anything about the switch vanishing, going away, not existent. The switch is still there. It's still a requirement, but how it's applied, this is how code is allowing us to kind of finagle the requirement. So this first one, up to 0.2 watts per square foot for means of egress. So you're allowed to keep the lights continuously illuminated for up to 0.2 watts per square foot in your area for path of egress, means of egress. But it's important that if we are taking this route, that the area must be designated on the plans to show that it's designated for means of egress. And also, the switch never went away. The switch is still required, but you can make it so that it's not accessible to unauthorized personnel. Okay, so it's up to us if you want to pursue that, or you just leave it alone and not worry about it. The second requirement, exception to accessibility. So we talked about in the previous slide that the switch got to be on and off and accessible to anyone. Well, there are certain locations that might not want to make their switch accessible. And that would be, and you could probably look it up in code. It'll be your malls, your atria, auditorium areas, retail merchandise sales areas, commercial, industrial storage areas, work areas. Well, I should say general commercial industrial work areas, not just work areas. and quite a few other areas. There is another, and there's actually a very important point. You also have placement of a manual area control where it poses a health and safety hazard. If that is your case, you could also use this exception. Now, the exception for location, locating your switch within the same enclosed space, there is an exception where you can move it to a remote location, and those would be spaces such as healthcare facilities, restrooms. Those are the main ones, okay? Healthcare facilities and restrooms, where you could move the switch to a different location. It doesn't mean the switch went away, it just means it's being relocated. And if we do decide to use a switch that is remotely located in the restroom or for the restroom, it's got to be a switch that tells the user, whoever's using this switch, that the lights are either on or off. So if it's a mechanical on and off switch where you flip the switch up and you know it's in the on position, then that would be a way to enunciate that the lights are on. If it's a digital switch where it's momentary push button, you press it, and mechanically you don't see anything happening, it needs to have some kind of pilot light or some kind of LED indicator on the light that would notify the occupant, the user, that the lights are on and off. That's what is meant by enunciated control. All right, so 130.1b, second requirement here, multi-level lighting control. So when I think about multi-level lighting control, I am thinking about dimming. Do I need to make my lights dimmable? At least up to this point, that's the question. So how do I know? Well, if the space that I'm working on, if it's equal to or over 100 square foot, and it's over 0.5 watts per square foot. So and is bolded and it's underlined. These two must be true, then you know you must have dimmable lights, or lights that meet this multi-level lighting control requirement. And how do you know what that means? If you have triggered it, you have to refer to table 130.1a, which we will, I believe, in the next slide. So what are the exceptions for this code section? Well, if your area has only one luminaire with 2 lamps, you're exempted. Restrooms, healthcare facilities, you're also exempted from dimming or multi-level lighting controls. So here's that table I was talking about. So if you have triggered this multi-level lighting control requirement, this is the table you will reference and determine how you go about making your lights comply with this multi-level lighting control. So you'll notice there's the minimum required control steps, and you also have to look at the uniform level of luminance. So most of us will be utilizing lights that are LED. So if you look over here, LED luminaires, you just have to get lights that are continuously dimmable. You're not going to be controlling LED lights with multiple steps. So we're talking about being able to dim the lights up and down, between 10 to 100% of the driver's lighting power. Okay. So look for those LED drivers that could do 10% dimming, all the way down to 10%. At a minimum, I would recommend maybe 5%, 1% dimming if we're looking at LED drivers. So knowing that we have to do dimmable lights because we have triggered this code section, go back to the switch we were talking about earlier, that on and off switch. So guess what that switch has to be able to do now? Yeah, you guessed it, dimming. So now that switch that does on and off must have the capability to dim these lights that have triggered this code requirement. We must be able to dim the lights up and down, okay? Okay, third mandatory requirement, shut off controls. This is actually a big one, a very, very important mandatory requirement. So pretty much every installed indoor lighting must have automatic shut off controls. So how do we do that? Well, it could be through means of occupant sensing technology, occupant sensing devices, I should say. Time clock, building automation, these are ways we can automatically shut off lights. Now, code will dictate in some areas where you must use occupant sensing controls as a means to do your automatic shut off. You can't just use time clock or building automation in those areas. But we can cover that in the next slide. Second bullet point, separate controls per floor and must be equal to or less than 5,000 square foot. So you can't have large control zones. You can't have zones that are like 6,000 square foot, 8,000 square foot, where you're just, turning them on and off, dimming them up and down. Those are just too large of zones to be controlled. So you got to break them up. It's got to be less than 5,000 square foot, equal to or less than. Separate controls by lighting types. So we kind of talked about this. Actually, we did talk about it. And, we spoke about a space where, if you have two or more types of lighting. So if you got general lighting and you got accent lighting, and maybe you have a third one, which could be maybe you got whiteboard lighting, those you need to control separately. To me, that is 3 zones. Okay. All right. So if you're using occupant sensing devices, you must mount the sensor at least 4 feet away from a supply air duct register. And that's very important because it is a code requirement. You don't actually find it in the standards, the actual code standards. You'll find it in the test procedures for the certified acceptance test technicians that go out there and do the verification and acceptance testing. So very important. So your exceptions for shutoff controls would be areas where it is serving and in operation 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So an example space I can think of would be maybe a hotel lobby, check-in. Obviously those spaces, those areas will pretty much be in operation, all year long. So don't expect those lights to be shut off because they're exempted. So you won't need any sensors in those areas. You won't need any time clock shutting lights off for that particular area. But once you go into the other areas like your corridors and your pool, other areas where technically it doesn't operate 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365, those will follow a different code requirement. Okay, electrical rooms, and I think some mechanical rooms, assuming it is pursuant to CEC section or Article 110.26, are exempted from this automatic shutoff requirement. So in a lot of cases, you can just provide an on and off switch, manual on and off switch, and let it be. You're allowed up to 0.1 watt per square foot for means of egress. So this could be your night lights that you're just keeping on all the time. And you're allowed up to 0.1 watt per square foot. Okay, so we're still on the topic of automatic shutoff, but these 5 areas that's shown on the screen here are areas where code is actually telling us, dictating that occupant sensors must be utilized as a means to automatically shut off your lights. So, small offices, multi-purpose rooms under a certain square footage, classrooms of any size, conference rooms of any size, and new for 2019 code, restrooms of any size must utilize occupant sensing controls to shut off your lights. Now, the maximum occupancy time delay is 20 minutes. So you can't have more than 20 minutes of occupancy time delay. Most sensors, when they ship out, will have a default setting of anywhere between 5 minutes to 10 minutes occupant time delay. And 10 minutes is plenty of time for the sensor to actually run its timer before it realizes that, okay, nobody's here, so I'm gonna shut off the lights. So these five locations, in addition to doing automatic shut off, how the lights turn on is also important. So when you walk into, let's say we're doing an office, when you walk into an office, there's only 2 modes that the lights can automatically turn on or operate. One is vacancy mode. So what is meant by that is you walk into the room, the sensor sees you, but it doesn't do anything. The lights don't turn on. You have to manually go to the wall switch and turn on the lights. That is what we call vacancy mode occupant sensing. Okay, that is one mode that you could select. Another mode that code will allow you to do is partial on. So you walk into the office, lights turn on, but they turn on partially, but it's got to be between a lighting power level of 50 to 70%. Okay, we're not talking about lighting level, we're talking about lighting power level between 50 to 70%. So, you walk in, lights partially turn on, between 50 to 70% lighting power, still plenty of light in the space. Most people won't feel the need to go to the manual switch to override and raise the lights. Most folks will be okay with that lighting, and if that is the case, then it's a win, because we're saving anywhere between 30 to 50% lighting power right off the bat, simply because you have enough lighting in the space and you don't feel the need to override the lights. So this requirement, whether you do vacancy mode or you do partial on mode, applies to all of these 5 spaces. Okay. Let me correct myself. Applies to 4 spaces. Restrooms don't have to follow this partial on or vacancy mode requirement. It could just be automatic on. All right, so we're still on the topic of automatic shutoff, and we're still talking about occupant sensors required in the area. And right now we're focused on corridors, stairwells, open areas, and warehouse, library, stack aisles. These all fall under the code section 130.1c6 for automatic shutoff. For these areas, the sensors will do either a full off or they'll do a partial off when the space is vacant. When I say partial off, I'm referring to lighting power being reduced by at least 50%, whether you're switching every other light or if you're doing dimming, which is really the preferred way to do it. So dim the lights by at least 50% when nobody's there, and that is what is meant by partial off. So if you decide to do partial off sensors, where it's doing high-low, high being 100%, low being a level at least 50% reduce, then you still have to do an automatic sweep off, and that could be achieved through a time clock that sweeps off the lights at nighttime when nobody's there, or you could choose, or you could opt for sensors that have the ability to do a low state and an off state. So really it has 2 timeouts. After it goes to a low state, if it sees no additional motion for a period of time, then it'll just go to off. And remember, the occupant timeout, maximum timeout delay you're allowed is up to 20 minutes. Okay. Or if you decide not to use a partial off sensor, go ahead and use a full off sensor where the lights just turn on automatically. And when nobody's there after 10 minutes or 15 minutes, lights turn off. I don't recommend it because most clients, most spaces don't want to have lights in corridors and stairwells off when nobody's there, especially during business hours. But it's okay, allowed per code, if we're going that route. Now, section 130.1c7, it's a little different. We're still talking about corridors and stairwells, but they're using the term common, and these are typically found in high-rise residential buildings where you have multiple tenants, multiple dwelling units sharing the same corridors and stairwells, and same thing with motel buildings. The corridors and stairwells are shared. They're common. In these spaces, there is no off requirement. They just go to a high state or a low state. So again, you're going to use sensors and you're going to achieve it through occupant sensing controls. All right, so 130.1c8, still on the topic of automatic shutoff. We're talking about hotel motel guest rooms. In these spaces, you are also required to do automatic shutoff. You have 2 choices. Actually, there's 3. The first way is you could do it through a captive key card switch, or you could do it through occupant sensing controls. Not listed here. You could, if you have lighting controls that gives us the ability to shut off the lights automatically within 20 minutes of vacancy, then that's also compliant. So we're talking about lights that must shut off automatically when there's no motion or no occupants in the space. In addition to that, at least half of your receptacles are also required to automatically shut off when nobody is there. And that's technically not in this code section. It's actually in 130.5D, but I feel that it's important to point that out because you'll actually get the whole story by knowing this. Same occupant sensing technology or same captive card key switch that is shutting these lights off. All right, so 130.1F, control interactions. This is actually a new code section that was added into our 2019 Title 24 code cycle. And what you will find in this section is really just a summary of the mandatory requirements that we spoke about, how they are able to override each other, really. As an example, you may have shutoff controls that turns off the lights, but shutoff controls shall permit the manual area controls to override it, and vice versa. So if a manual area control shall permit the shutoff controls to turn off the lights automatically. Okay, so there's a little bit of kind of an explanation or a summary of how these mandatory requirements play out. Not one supersedes the other. It's just more of a last command type of approach. So a manual switch can override daylighting controls. I know we didn't talk about daylighting, but it can. Automatic demand response could also be overridden by a manual area controls. So take the time to just go through this new code section. It's more of a cross check of what the different requirements can do when it's all in place and operational. And that's it for this course section. Thank you.